Hey there, listener. Corey Andrew Powell here, and I'm excited to share that Motivational Mondays is now sponsored by BetterHelp. Feeling stressed or anxious? Well, BetterHelp brings you online therapy that's convenient and affordable. NSLS members get 50% off your first month of BetterHelp when you sign up at betterhelp.com/NSLS or click the link in the show notes. Start your journey to better mental health today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Motivational Mondays. I am your host, of course, Corey Andrew Powell. And today we are so thrilled to have a very special guest with us today, Alexa Curtis. Now, she's a former Disney host and a dynamic serial entrepreneur who's made a name for herself by being fearless and inspiring thousands of young people around the world. She's known for her bold approach, even calling back those who have initially rejected her. Now, that is very, very gutsy. She's empowering Gen Z to build their own brand, which I love. And with the back to school season approaching, there's no better time to hear from Alexa about how to overcome fear and seize opportunities. So Alexa, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, it is my pleasure. And we have so much in common, things that, I was never a Disney host, but I love the idea of sharing with young people, especially how to become a brand, because I also do talks on that and try to make sure people understand that you are a living embodiment of a brand every time you open your mouth or interact with people. So I love that you're doing that work. But aside from your journey in general, I guess I would love to know, like, how do you transition from being a Disney host to a successful entrepreneur? It's a very inspiring transition. So how did it happen?
Oh, thank you. Well, I love your work as well. So it's nice to have that, mutual connection too. But I had started this company prior to joining Disney. So I really think that was how I was able to get my foot in the door with them, is because when I cold pitched the show to them, I had a decent amount of experience with a podcast prior, and my original fashion blog I started when I was quite young at age 12. And so to, in a way, go back to entrepreneurship, they never pay enough money to where you can really not do things there.
Right.
Fun fact. So no, I was really always kind of an entrepreneur, like even being there. So when I left, I was able to more just go back to what I had already been doing, but with the perspective of having that background and experience of working with a dynamic company like Disney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's sometimes in life, there's like lateral moves, we call them, where you don't necessarily, okay, this is not the job that's going to like change my tax bracket necessarily, but having that as a resume item is huge. And, as companies go, Disney would be definitely one of those companies. So fearlessness is a big part of your brand, which I love. And the idea about calling people back who once rejected you, tell me about that. Like, how did that start?
So funny. Yeah, I had this idea. I was skiing a few years ago, and my now ex-boyfriend, he went skiing for the day and I didn't want to go. And so randomly I was in the hotel that I was in, and I had never really posted that much on TikTok, but I just was like, I'm just going to film like random things that I have. And it was in that period, that day, that I posted this video that it like went viral. And then I didn't really do it again for a bit. And then I kind of started doing it more consistently, and it just picked up a lot of traction online. And now it's something that, when I need to, I'll do it. And I think it really resonates with people for a variety of different reasons. But it's always interesting to me because it's always some really silly reason I haven't heard back. And so for me to, as embarrassing as it is, to call people back to show that this is why you're not hearing back and to not take it personal is really the goal of these videos.
Wow. So let me make sure I understand. So it's not like you're calling back to be vengeful or vitriolic. You're calling back being like, hey, I applied for this, or hey, I was interested in this and I reached out to you, didn't hear back. Is there a reason why? Like, is it more along those lines?
Yes. And I mean, look, people take it in whatever way they want to take it. And that's not really my responsibility at the end of the day. Like, I'm putting my my name and my reputation on the line. Also very uncomfortable to ask somebody this to help somebody else. You know, I'm asking people authentically to tell me why they rejected me in the hopes that it helps somebody else who hasn't been able to secure their dream job or isn't comfortable with following up, to prove to them, because every single time I call somebody, it's just the silliest reason. Oh my gosh, I never got your email, or I completely forgot, or oh wow, it's been sitting in my outbox for 4 weeks. So that's the goal. I have no reason to, embarrass myself for any form of vengeance.
Right. But I love that too, because like what happens is there's a couple things going on there. You might find out that the reason you didn't hear back is something that's really out of your control. It wasn't a rejection. It may have gotten lost in the shuffle. Things are highly competitive. You never know where your correspondence ended up, right? So that's a good thing about following up. But also, what's really important about what you're saying is the willingness to face accountability or face like what people have to say, the criticism. I think that is where it's really tricky for a lot of people to say, okay, I better be ready to hear what they say, or else it's probably not a good question to ask. When you think you have to be kind of ready for the criticism?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's more so people are so scared of what somebody could say to them. And so they don't follow up because they don't want to be rejected, of course. But my mindset is, if I don't follow up, right, I'll never know what could have been. And if I am not hearing back for a reason like, oh, this person wanted to respond to me and it's sat in their outbox for months or weeks and they didn't realize, that's my mentality. So it's almost really a mindset shift of looking at this like, sure, you can be scared of them rejecting you, or you can think of it like, when you actually hear why you have been rejected, is going to inspire you to maintain a consistent follow-up flow, because otherwise people's emails just go unanswered and you miss out on things because of your own anxiety or insecurity.
Yeah. There's a wonderful woman I follow named Mandy McEwen on LinkedIn, and she's like a sort of like a LinkedIn guru expert for Gen Z and millennials as well. And she has a really big part in her program and her mission about, the networking component. And a part of that is, not being afraid, just putting yourself out there, the vulnerability. And everybody I talk to on Motivational Mondays who's been successful, whether it be someone like yourself or a CEO of Chuck E. Cheese, that is always a common thread I noticed. It's fearlessness. It's an opportunity was given to someone, perhaps, and they didn't even know how to do it. But they said, you know what? I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say yes, and I'll figure it out when I get there, or, go after that thing that I think is unattainable. So that's a really valuable lesson in the leadership space. And so for you, I guess that's how you developed the fearless attitude overall. You just sort of began to face the people who rejected you.
Yeah, I think when you come from my kind of background, really small town, no money, no connections, there was just this fire inside of me from a young age to really do something different with my life. And so if I was fearful of things or fearful of rejection, I would never have been able to leave a small town. I would never have been able to really prove to myself that I was able to do or lead a different kind of lifestyle than I think what people expected of me. And so that's really what I think of when I think of fear, or the lack of probably that I have.
Yeah. Well, I'm just fascinated by that. And I'll just, one more final thought, or I'll ask you about that, and then we can move on. I'm so fascinated by like reaching out to people who rejected you. Do you have a memorable story of your own of where this bold sort of positioning of like, I'm going to reach out to someone, where it paid off for you, where they were like, hey girl, yeah, we've been looking for you, or something? Like, was there ever a positive that you can remember where this was a big thing for you that happened?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I've done so many of these at this point. I'm trying to think if I can pinpoint one where something paid off. I think it's more just being able to have the security, like one in particular, there was like a large group of, what's the word, like medical institutions in Connecticut called Quest Diagnostics. And yeah, because I'm from Eastern Connecticut, and I really wanted to do a partnership with them, and just like back and forth. And when I finally called the guy, well, there was two different phone calls. In the first one, when he was like, we literally don't do partnerships like this. And I was like, I don't believe you. So I went online, and like, they literally don't. And then the second time when I was like, okay, so you don't do these, so let's try one. And then he really ghosted me. And then I called him, and he's like, oh, I don't even work there anymore. I actually left And so we had this, kind of nice, candid convo. And I was like, congratulations. Like, hope you love your new job, wherever
Yeah.
that is. And so some of those leads end up going cold, but, they go cold at some point for the right reason. And again, it's just that reminder of like, okay, you're not just ignoring me because I'm ignoring you. You're ignoring me because you've A, left the company, or B, your company doesn't do anything that I'm pitching you and you're not interested in doing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are reasons sometimes. I think we're so, to your point, we're so afraid of rejection. We're taking everything personally. Like, oh, they
Yeah,
don't want me. They don't. But sometimes, there are logistical reasons. Like, we just don't do that. But thank you for calling. Goodbye. So,
exactly.
yeah, that's really great. Well, words of advice out there, just, go for it. And don't always think it's about you if they don't call you back. It's not always the case. So what are some of the key strategies, like when you're doing these emails or cold calling to try to, you mentioned in this case, you reached out to a company. Do you just introduce yourself and you're fearless in saying, hey, I had this idea. I think your company and I would work well together because XYZ, and then just throw it out to the heavens and just wait?
Depends what I'm pitching. Like, so if I, like the influencer personal brand side of what I do, I have a new strategy that's more using LinkedIn. So I'll connect with, say, a marketing manager on LinkedIn. I'll kind of engage with their posts, and then I'll send them a message and say, I have a pretty strong following of, young adult women and Gen Z, and I have a newsletter and a podcast. And would you be interested in talking over some partnership ideas on the phone? And then if they reply is when I'll send a formal calendar invite or something like that. If it's working with a university for a potential pitch, like right now I've been doing a lot of licensing deals for a course that I have. I'll find somebody in the careers or HR department. I'll reach out to them, switch the pitch a bit, but, make it a lot more. I've kind of started to add in a particular quote about personal branding, that Gen Zs who have personal brands online are like 90% more likely to get a job out of college. And I find that kind of hooks them in.
Yeah.
So I really try and ideally give people a reason to reply, because I never want it to look like spam.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think the cold calling component is what's really intimidating for a lot of people to do that, because they don't really know how to make that introduction, what to say.
Yeah.
So I love that you have almost like this core pitch, it sounds like, and then you just sort of customize it based on what that particular brand might be looking for. But that's all based on, too, you've got to do the work, the research.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even for example, I went back and forth for weeks with this brand. I thought it was going to be like a $10,000, $20,000 deal. It made so much sense. Back and forth, back and forth. They ultimately said no because they switched their initiatives, which is, undeniably annoying. I'm like, how do I, did you just waste my time? Like, how did you not
Right.
know this?
Yeah.
But that being said, I've now got a very fleshed out proposal. I can go and have gone and sent on to other companies that I think may be interested in that. So it's just one of those things in business, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's never, like when you have something that's productive that you've done from a situation, you have to pivot. Another one of those great traits that I've discovered among successful people are things just like that. It's sort of the mind shift. Okay. Like you just said, did they just waste my time? Well, maybe, but I now fleshed out a proposal that I didn't have before I began engaging with them. So, yeah, I think so often it's our mindset that really can dictate our success if we are willing to just not, be a victim and fall, into our poor me self.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal. Now, what do you think about this idea that Gen Z is sort of, first of all, that's one of the biggest demographics now that's being courted by every aspect of society, especially marketing. But there's also this stigma with Gen Z that generation's a little bit more disconnected from a personal standpoint, maybe cold, the communication skills are not like they were for previous generations that might have been more hands-on versus the technology based. I mean, what's your response to something like that?
I literally was going to suggest use the word lazy, because a lot of people say Gen Z is
I was trying to be nice, but yeah, that is one that comes up, which I think is completely really inaccurate. But yeah, lazy. I have heard that too.
I interviewed a woman who was on a Netflix show, and she's a big company. And I literally posted that yesterday. Why is it so hard to hire Gen Z nowadays? And she really said it's an element of laziness and entitlement. I mean, I am Gen Z, so I say this in a very candid, authentic manner. Right. That being said, I work obviously with most people, brands, founders, serial entrepreneurs who I interview who are 35 plus. So a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
times they do ask me a similar question. I think the main problem is social media, right? Like the way that I built my business or that you built your business. And I mean, I started in 2011. I did not grow up in the world where like I could post a photo online and just be a millionaire overnight. And
Right. That'd be a
so,
whole other
yeah,
ball game. Yeah.
I know. So it's progressed significantly to where we exist in a society of where that is in a way so common, even though it's 0.01% of people,
Mm-hmm.
that that's what everyone wants. And so this generation and generations after whatnot are really keen to have that. I've seen a lot of trends on TikTok and whatnot that I just think are really silly in the sense, I don't know. I mean, I saw one the other day where it was like, how do I say this properly? Not that they quit more, but they want to be treated so well. And of course, like everyone wants to be treated so well. But
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I think there's a line between these people think that like they should just, people and their boss should be on their knees. Like, I'm so glad you're in the office. When in reality, like if you're hired to get the coffee, just please shut up and get the coffee. I get you want
Right.
more in life. Like,
Yeah.
so do
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
all. But
Mm-hmm.
like I was doing that. Like I did it for years. And so again, I don't come from the background of like where it was just easy to get it overnight. And those days of the coffee days or whatever it would be shaped me as a future founder because I have the experience. So I think there's proper ways to go about like engaging with your higher ups or whatnot if you want to do more. But I don't think that means that you need to be doing everything when you first start or you're like 21.
Yeah. Yeah. I interviewed a casting director who has this new show where it's like a ghost hunter show, and Kristen Stewart is the producer. And it's like, but they're all like LGBT, like there's like a trans ghost hunter, and like it's like a really out there show. But the casting director was a guest on Motivational Mondays, and he was talking about like the internship um, process, and the same thing, sort of what you just said. He was like, a lot of kids get internships and they're complaining about what they're doing, and yeah, it's not glamorous all the time. But like, if someone says for you to get the coffee, like bring back the best damn cup of coffee you could find. Like be that guy. Like come back like I bought you 15 flavors with like 20 different sugars and 5 different. Like if that's your job, like do that and be that person. And so I think you're right. Social media has sort of given us this accelerated look at success, which you can't
Yeah.
even trust because you can create a narrative on social media. So I think you're competing with also the false narratives of success and this idea
Yeah.
that's been accelerated. And I think it's just a false sense that I think Gen Z is getting a bad rep because of that dynamic in social media.
Yeah. And I think also to them, you know, they think, why would I get coffee when I could sit here and TikTok all day and get the respect from my online fans or
Mm,
whatever, you know, and get these massive brand partnerships. But the reality is like, again, 0.01% of people get that.
yeah, yeah.
You know, that's not going to help or change the world. That's not going to make you a successful person in any area. While the person who's like getting the 15 cups of coffee for the boss is probably going to end up making a killing, getting introduced to everyone while you're
Right.
TikToking in your bedroom. And like, who knows what's coming from that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. It's like playing a lottery. Like which lottery ticket are you really gonna kind of put the highest stake in? And there's
Yeah.
something interesting too about that. Even in your journey, obviously social media has been a big part of that. But what you're talking about is putting in the work. Yeah, you might be that person that posts one video or something and tomorrow wake up with $1 million contract. But to your point again, that's far and in between. But putting in the work on social media with strategy, not just sort of using it as a fun thing to post, recklessly or without strategy. When you do it with strategy, it is something that can definitely wield some results,
Yeah.
obviously in your case and in many other people's cases, but it has to be done almost like if you approach it like a business as opposed
Yeah.
to a thing, just another photograph of like, here's me and my cat.
Well, and that's why I always say, I mean, there's a huge difference between being an entrepreneur and a content creator, said influencer, right? Like we
Mm,
all have influence. You know, a lot of people get a lot of followers or buy a lot of followers or whatnot, but just because you have that doesn't mean that you are building or running some massively, wildly successful company. It's very different to be a proper entrepreneur and then just sit home and again get paid to make content online, depending on like the way that the content you're like, depending on what it is. So I think there's an underlying, you know, you need to be incredibly savvy, you need to be very good at business, but 9 times out of 10, these influencers, these content creators, that's not what they are. They don't need to do that. They don't need to be massively successful entrepreneurs. They just want to get paid to post online, and that's fine until, you know, at some point it doesn't scale or whatnot. And then then you have to decide what you want to do.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, I have a whole separate sort of like entity outside of this too, whereas my own brand as Corey Andrew, it's separate from Corey Andrew Powell, the host of the show. But it's taken me a long time to do that. And I work with brands as an influencer. And I had to first, and here's a really important thing I want people to know. I had to first really be okay with my authentic self. That means physically, who I am, what I believe in, all those things before I can even expect a brand to work with me, because if I'm not certain of those things, how can another brand be certain of those things? So there's a whole element of really knowing who you are. And I'm kind of thrilled that after this call today, like later on, I have a call with a clothing brand to do a little something on the, you know, a little social media influencer campaign. But that's like after 3 or 4 months of trying to get this brand on board. And when people see the posts when I do it, to them, they'll think, oh, it just happened overnight. No, this is like 4 months of me going back and forth. So kids, put in the work and don't be afraid to roll your sleeves up.
Love that. 100%.
Yeah. So now of course, your brand, fearlessness, being bold. How do you balance the being direct, I guess, and being bold, being fearless, with also sort of balancing out with like the being professional and being respectful without being like, you know, there's this delicate balance of wanting to be assertive when you're trying to, you know, establish yourself as a brand, but also be respectful. So how is the balance working out for you?
It's definitely interesting. I mean, I think at this point I've kind of nailed it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've made some errors, but I've also come to the realization that, you know, the internet is a nasty place. I had something pretty terrible happen in April. And I think, you know, as careful as I can be, it's like to be completely careful, you have to never be on the internet. Like if like finance guys and tech bros and stuff, like I admire them because they have no idea what this world is like. And so I think, again, there's pros and cons, but I feel like, you know, give or take, there's sometimes I'll post something and then I'll delete it. So it's kind of just like a learning curve. I mean, you can never be too careful, but again, then you have to think like, okay, but what do people want to see? So now I kind of know the content. I know how to do something clickbaity, but how to do it tastefully. I know how to post a sexy photo, but like make sure the caption is in the right headspace. So it doesn't look like over sexualized. It's all learning, but I feel like I've kind of gotten it down.
You know, I love that because it is a minefield, and my partner is in finance and older than me, and he's very like, are you sure you want to put that out there, that post? Because, you know, everything's forever on the internet. And I'm like, yeah, that's how I feel. He's like, yeah, but you don't have to always put out everything that you feel. And so there was this long time learning curve of how to deal with the internet, like from when it first started, when I would just like, you know, go off and not realizing that that's always going to live if you don't, you know, if you're not careful and it's out there. So that's a really important thing to share with people, is that, you know, just you got to be accountable and conscious of your content on social media. And I think that's been the pitfall for so many of us. And I think I'm pretty familiar with the incident that you're referring to. And
how?
Well, there was something else. Well, I would just say the running, the marathon thing.
You know, it's so wild because it's like it put me on the map in ways that like like the fact that so many people I've never met are like, oh, I know, I saw that.
You're the
like,
marathon girl. Yeah.
And it's like the most bizarre thing. But yeah, that was like a catalyst moment in my career. And it's like a terrible thing, but it also taught me a lot. But it's just bizarre because I'll have these random convos or I'll meet somebody in like Run Club or at the coffee shop. And he's like, I saw that tweet and I laughed. Like, what happened? And I'm like, do you really want to know?
It was, well, you know, and people, they're probably like, what the hell are they talking about? But, you know, but it was really innocuous. Like you meant no harm, you know, in what you did. And I was like, when I first read it, I was like, wait, so I can just like join the marathon without really signing up. And you're like, no, you can't do that. That's why we're having this problem. But anyway, I'll let people go Google, Alexa Curtis marathon, and they can figure that out on their own. But the point is, you owned it afterwards, and you reconciled it, and you even did a nice charitable thing to it. So it was a beautiful roundabout of how you learned from that moment and turned it into a positive. So well done, ultimately.
You have no choice. Like, that's the most bizarre thank you. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just, I think at some point I would like to talk more about it, because I think what happened is really just so out of control, and like it's impossible to be in your 20s now, make a mistake for something, and like all of a sudden now you've murdered someone.
Yeah, it's intense.
Hundreds of thousands of death threats for like something I just didn't know, but like
Yeah.
whatever. But again,
Yeah.
that's the reality of the internet, right? Is that's the world we live in, and so you just never know.
I so appreciate this conversation because I don't think we've ever had one like this on the show, where it's really about this social consciousness when it comes to social media, and how immediately just one false move that can be completely unintentional, and you have this world that's engulfed in the bullying mentality. It's almost like Frankenstein. The mob forms, and they're chasing you up the tower with their torches. You're like, wait, I'm 20. I made a mistake. Don't I get some grace in that? And so it's very scary, to navigate that. And only the strong can survive. So be very careful out there, kids, when you're doing your social
Mm-hmm.
posts. And that's a great lesson from Miss Alexa Curtis today. So in other fast-paced competitive job markets, I guess, that are out there, what do you think in general are important skills for landing a new job, whether it be technical or communicative? Do you think there's one that's more important than the other in your eyes, as far as landing a new job? What's the top skills you think you should have?
You're such a good interviewer, because the way that you like so organically moved from like convo to a different topic is just like super inspiring.
Thank you.
But well, I think there's two different ways. So I would say number one, on the sense of like what people do think about Gen Z, the pro and the con, I think that you don't want to go into a job interview and be like, you've got this massive personal brand. I think that there's a lot of value in being able to know how to utilize the internet to be able to help potentially your boss, right, post or build a brand or utilize and leverage LinkedIn. But I don't think that if you go and say like, I've got 1 million followers on TikTok, because I think that a lot of times somebody, potential hire, might think like, oh, wow, is that going to distract you from the job I'm going to give you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's one side. Yeah. And then I think the other side is, probably like those hard and soft skills. I interviewed a former LinkedIn VP on my podcast a few months ago, and she had a lot to say about that. I think being able to also say, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not, and this is what I'd like to learn more about, instead of being like, I'm good at everything, because no one can be good at everything, is really appealing to a boss.
Yeah. And you raise a really great point about social media. Like, there is the Gen Z generation. It's very normal to be like, I'm on social media a lot. I'm on Instagram all day. I'm on TikTok, whatever. That's a normal thing because that's part of the construct of that generation. An employer may misinterpret that as, is this person going to be online all day? And I've seen like that happen. I've seen that perception happen. And there's an interesting balance there. I think that the gatekeepers, who are like Gen X and millennials, are going to have to understand that that's not a distraction. That's sort of like a part of the landscape. It's all kind of, it's baked in the cake at this point. You can't have somebody sitting at their desk all day when they're supposed to be working. But, there's got to be a balance there, because that is the world we live in. So I think it's a little misunderstanding on both sides, maybe, when it comes to that.
I agree.
Yeah. So let me ask you this final question to conclude this interview, and it's more or less about your own personal situation, I guess, when it comes to motivation. So how do you stay motivated and maintain confidence when you do have those setbacks and failures or rejections?
Oh, well, it's hard. I mean, the more times you're rejected, right? I definitely think that the stronger you become. What I like to do now is every time I'm rejected, I go and find someone or something that gives me some form of a yes, even if it's something very simple like, oh, I want somebody to be on my podcast and I know they're going to say yes, like let me reach out to them. So I definitely think that helps. And it's a lot of growing pains. I mean, being an entrepreneur, being a young entrepreneur, I think I've become significantly, the older I've gotten, I've become a lot kinder to myself. I mean, even when that happened in April, I mean, that was the first time that, I think I really reevaluated and was like, I don't even know, like it spun me in a completely different, direction in a way, because it was so mentally exhausting and taxing to go through that and just like be a young person. And so I'm very glad I came out of it on the other end and that I was able to rebound from it, because I think just like the severity of what I went through is an undeniably, number one, painful and socially unacceptable thing to put somebody through for, quite frankly, like a very minor mistake.
Yeah.
That was like very obvious, right, throughout that whole thing. And so like being a lot kinder to myself. So like with the rejection and with the highs and the lows and the things that go wrong, just really just kind of turning it all off. Because I think when you're an entrepreneur, you become so tunnel vision, so defined by your career and the growth. And sometimes you do forget to like live. I know that sounds silly, but like, even if you're on a trip, you're probably writing emails, or even if you're doing this, you want to take a photo and you're just like, that fire again inside of you, that obsession with entrepreneurship, it never really goes away. And so when really painful things happen, I think that's those moments where you're like, okay, this is my job. And now I need to go like live, like go on a walk and actually like walk and just like stare at the trees or sit in a field, things that really don't matter, but in the scheme of the world and you being alive actually really do have value.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great words of wisdom from Miss Alexa Curtis, former Disney host and dynamic serial entrepreneur who's made a name for herself by being, I would say, a fearless badass. There, I said it. And continued inspiration to you. And thank you for inspiring so many young people and those of us who aren't so young. Thanks for all you do. And thanks for being here on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you so much for having me.